welcome back to Museum Monthly. I'm Christina Perez, and today we have Nick Foster here today, and we actually have a live audience for the first time. And today we are talking about a farm here in Wilton, Connecticut that tried to be the biggest dairy farm in New England. Can you explain more about that?
Yeah. So the Gunning Dairy Farm, or the Castle Coote Farm, as it was, the owner tried to name it. The name hasn't really lasted through history, but it was an attempt by a guy by the name of Thomas Gunning Jr. He was a bit of an entrepreneur. He was always sort of looking for, as best we can tell, sort of get-rich schemes. And he had a Wilton connection. He was from New York, but through his mom, his mom was a Wilton resident, and he had actually went to school in Wilton. He went to Wilton Academy, which was a private school here in Wilton during the 19th century. And having grown up in Wilton, or spent time in Wilton, he must have seen quite a few dairy farms. Wilton was a big dairy farming community at the time. And he must have gotten it in his mind that he was going to get the biggest dairy farm around and try to make money that way. So he bought a bunch of property during 1887, actually right here in Wilton. He was the largest property owner in Wilton. The 384 acres he owned stretched from Allen's Meadows down to where Siding Rail School is today. So actually, we're here where we're sitting at Wilton High School, would have been part of the property. And he tried to acquire 1,000 cows for his dairy farm. The person that was funding this was a guy by the name of Leland Stanford. Leland Stanford was the uncle of his wife, Christina. And Leland Stanford is probably more famous for the fact that he founded Stanford University, which will be relevant later. So Gunning started his farm, bought all these cows, built some farm buildings. Actually, you can see the very large stone silo that he built behind us on the screen. The problem was Thomas Gunning really didn't know anything about dairy farming and immediately started sort of mismanaging the property. So he opened the farm in the fall of 1887, and then by the spring of 1888, Uncle Leland came calling to say, "How's the dairy farm going?" And Thomas Gunning Jr. replied, got into a heated argument with Leland Stanford, and Leland basically said, "I'm taking my money and leaving to go back to set up Stanford University," which left Mr. Gunning Jr. without any of the funds that he needed to operate his dairy farm. So pretty much the farm immediately went under because, again, Gunning didn't know what he was doing. Apparently, he got in several arguments with his wife about the finances, and they soon divorced. And without any of the cash, the farm went under, and Gunning actually had to flee the country thanks to the people he owed money to came calling. The farm was then broken up, lasted less than a year. It was passed to a few different people who were trying to sort of buy back the land that he had purchased. Gunning fled all the way to South America. Actually, the last we hear of him, he was in Chile, apparently trying to avoid some business deals down there that had gone south. And apparently died in Chile about 10 years after the farm went under. The farm was broken up. It went to a few different landowners and actually was later owned by the people who would sell it to the town of Wilton to create Wilton High School. But the Gunning farm lasted less than a year, but it was this sort of big, everyone talking about the Gunning farm. He's going to have 1,000 cows. I don't think he ever quite got there just because, again, mismanagement of funds. But it was almost Wilton's claim to fame. We had the biggest dairy farm in New England.
That's amazing. I know you mentioned about how the wife and her uncle pretty much helped fund this entire thing. So this was pretty much a family business? Was it like split in some way?
Yeah, so Gunning came up with the idea, pitched it to Leland. So Leland Stanford had made his money through the railroad. They lived out in California, and he was one of the largest owners of the Central Pacific Railroad, which in the 1880s was one of the biggest railroads in the United States. So Leland had plenty of money. So when Gunning came up with this idea of a dairy farm, it was a pretty reasonable idea because as Wilton was a dairy farming community. So it basically was Leland was writing these checks, sort of assuming that Gunning knew what he was doing, and Gunning did hire some people to help him. He did hire a farm manager, but the impression that I get is that he was sort of a micromanager and didn't want to let the people who knew what they were doing actually do what they were hired to do. So Leland Stanford wasn't involved directly, but basically he would apparently showed up and asked what's going on with the farm and didn't get an answer that he liked because Gunning didn't really know how to give a correct answer. So the farm was meant to be a sort of a family-owned farm, but once Leland pulled out, there was no money actually for it. Gunning didn't have much money himself, so he was relying on Uncle Leland.
And you also mentioned how they tried to get 1,000 cows. Like, what was like the starting point almost? Like, how did like expand on, and then how did like finally like?
So once Gunning had all the money, he built the farm itself. He built a huge dairy barn, and then built a silo and a few other different sort of cow farm infrastructure buildings is the best that I can say. And then he started buying cows. Now you can't buy 1,000 cows all at once. So I believe the last records I saw, he was up to about 200 and was looking to acquire more. We do know that the farm was technically operating in the spring of 1888. And I assume that he was going to try to build up over time, but never quite got there because I think even 200 cows was too much for Mr. Gunning. Unfortunately, after he left, the farm sort of fell into disarray. The silo, the big silo that was there, burned, and the roof caved in. So it wasn't really. It was more of just a big stone block pile as opposed to a silo. It's actually the only thing that's left of the farm up on Catalpa Road in Wilton. There is the cornerstone of the silo still exists. So that's the last sort of record of the farm physically standing. But yeah, it was a good idea in theory, but everybody involved didn't know what they were doing, so it didn't last.
Right, and you also mentioned many other people involved, like he hired workers.
Yeah.
Like what happened after? Do you know anything like what happened after the fact of some sort?
Unfortunately,
like,
no. A lot of the records for the farm itself disappeared, so we don't know who those the workers were. Presumably they were local people who had farming experience. As I mentioned, there was a lot of dairy farms in the area. That was one of Wilton's biggest industries during the late 19th century. So I'm sure he just pulled people who knew the industry nearby. And then once the farm went under, I'm sure they traveled and found other work in the area. So I don't think there was much left of the farm to begin with because basically all the creditors showed up and took everything they could and sold it off to get the money back from Gunning that he owed them.
Right. And one more question. So you mentioned that there was a lot of competition. Can you like possibly get more into the competition between like his farm and like the other dairy farms in Connecticut, like Wilton in general?
Dairy farming in Connecticut at the time would have been fairly small family businesses. So I think what he was trying to do was sort of step away from the competition in the sense that, well, if I build the biggest farm, I'm going to have, I'll swallow up all the other competition and have a monopoly on dairy farming in Wilton. Most of the farms in this area would have been sort of small family farms, kind of what we think of like a rural family farm today. That's really what it was, people with a few dozen cows. He, I think, was trying to saw a place where he could, build a gigantic farm and sell milk for the cheapest and sort of get rid of all his competition in town. Unluckily for him, he didn't quite know what he was doing, and all the family farms in Wilton did because they had been doing it for generations. So it was, again, a good idea in theory on his part. I think he did identify, he had enough business instincts to recognize there was an opportunity, but not enough business instincts to actually make it happen.
Okay, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for watching, audience. Thank you for being a great audience. And yeah, we'll be back next month. And yeah, thank you so much.